Welcome to the Ansons podcast. Today we're going to be discussing all things budget, particularly the impact of the budget on business owners, many of whom in the light of the budget changes will be looking to sell. And we are going to take you through what your various options are in that regard, from selling the shares to solvent liquidations to companies buying their own shares. We'll also be touching upon the impact on the budget for employment and in relation to property sales as well. So stay tuned and hope you enjoy the podcast. I'm joined today by my colleague Jamie Gill, who is the head of our corporate team at Ansons Solicitors. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you.
And we're here today to discuss, it's been all over the news and all over various breakfast seminars and LinkedIn hot takes, the budget which occurred yesterday.
Yeah, the highly anticipated budget, which we've all been bracing ourselves for, landed yesterday. And I think it was in line with kind of what we were expecting broadly in terms of changes. The capital gains tax was one of the biggies that came through.
Well, there was lots of it, and I think that what I'd like us to do today, in some respects, there's lots of people out there telling people about what the rates are and what's changed, and I guess we'll touch on that. But for me, perhaps more importantly, is what business owners can do in the light of the changes that have been introduced. Starting with the big one, which has kept us busy, actually, because for the last month or so, a lot of business owners and holders of assets have been, in anticipation of the budget, have been transferring assets, gifting assets, trying to get stuff done before the budget. So that's kept you guys busy, I assume.
Yeah, that's right, mine. So what we've had is a lot of, which is often the case, a lot of activity on the lead up in anticipation of changes which may or may not take effect from the day of the budget. So in this instance, that was true to a degree. So capital gains did change on the midnight of the 29th into the 30th of October. So we saw a lot of transactions in sort of the 6 weeks leading up to. So that was anything from disposals, sales in the classic sense, but also just some preemptive reorganisation, trying to get the benefit and locking in the
gains and the tax rates that were existing in place, the certainty that was there. Just in terms, I mean, we'll have to touch on what some of those changes were, but in terms of capital gains tax, we saw the sort of basic rate go up from 10 to 18%, and then a hike of the higher rate from 20 to 24%. That's kicked in pretty much straight away.
Yeah, that was straight away. So that came in sort of effectively the morning of the budget. So if you hadn't done your deal before the budget, it's gone then. So it's quite a chunky increase there.
Yeah, but then in terms of that, one of the changes that is staged is BADR, I've heard it called, the artist formerly known as Entrepreneurs Relief, which is what is BADR?
So there's a number of names for it. BAD Relief, some people call it BADR, Entrepreneurs Relief, more commonly known as. It's an effective reduction in CGT, whereby if you satisfy conditions in terms of ownership and employment. So
you've got to have had your shares in your business for a couple of years, is it?
This is the critical part of this. So to qualify for BADR, you need a 2-year run-in. And so the thought process, the thinking time for that is really well in advance. So if you're not qualifying for it now, you're not going to beat the 14.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to make yourself qualify, save, I guess, that you tick over the 2 years between.
Correct. So you need to have had at least 5% voting share capital rights for that 2 years. You need to have been an officer or an employee for that 2-year period, unbroken. And then once you tick all those boxes at the end of the 2-year period, yes, you can qualify for an effective rate of what will be until April 25, 10% CGT.
So on that first £1 million, if you've got shares in a company, at least 5%, and you sell them, you would get a tax rate of 10%. You'd pay 100 grand's worth of tax.
Yeah.
And that's going up by 4%, with effect from 5th of April or whatever the April tax change date is. So that's an extra, on that example, that's an extra 40 grand.
It is. So what's interesting is on the run up to April, the business asset disposal relief is actually more valuable now because the CGT rates have gone up to 14 and 18%. So what was worth 100 grand is now worth 140 grand. And then over the next 2 years, that BADR relief will slowly come in line with the CGT. So it bumps up to 14% in April 25, and then it goes up to 18% in April 26, I believe.
So there is a real incentive then for business owners to get on with, particularly if they qualify for this BADR, they've got the 2 years, they've got the 5%, to get on with selling these assets, particularly if it was something they were planning to do.
Absolutely. I think now is the time really to get that moving. What are we, 5 or 6 months away from April? It's not a lot of time actually to go through a sort of a sale process. If you have started those sort of conversations and you're down the line there, then yes, okay, you've got a head start. But if you're starting cold, actually finding a buyer for a business, going through the sort of agreeing terms and everything that's involved in the sale process, it's quite a tight timescale.
It might be, but it's definitely something that we can help.
Oh, it's absolutely doable. I've only just on the run up to the budget, we've done a £1.6 million share sale in 4 weeks. It's absolutely doable. But it requires the sort of the focus of all parties to achieve that. And I think what you might find is because of the benefit, particularly on the sell side, you might find that the buyer's going to leverage that position in terms of negotiations.
So
as well.
I guess the first step, though, if I am this business owner and I'm thinking, look, I definitely like the sound of paying 40k less tax, and I've been thinking about selling for a while, first step would be what? Speak to the lawyers and their professional advisors generally?
Definitely. Speak to your accountant, speak to your lawyers, having a good relationship with a lawyer, your lawyer who understands your business and who's got contacts in the industry is going to be hugely beneficial. Start that conversation because then they can start giving you some advice as to preparing for sale. What can you do to perfect?
Yeah, I've heard you talk about that before. So often before people do a deal, they're selling the shares in the company. They might want to sort certain legal issues and problems out, I assume.
Yeah, definitely. So you want to get your house in order as if you were selling your house at home. Your residential property, you're going to want to make it look nice and presentable to a buyer.
Get the jet wash out.
Absolutely.
Corporate law jet wash.
Yeah, if that's an analogy you want to use, Martin, definitely. And just getting rid of, any of those skeletons in the closet, just, making sure everything's in order so that, you're giving a buyer fewer opportunities to sort of chip away at
the price. So if you've got some litigation that's pending, or you might want to get that settled.
Yeah, you look at it, get some proper advice, and things happen in business. You're often chasing bad debts, or there's an employee issue or whatever. That buyers, sophisticated buyers, will understand that is an issue, but get proper advice, get it dealt with quickly, promptly
before the sale. Because when you come to sell it, a bit like somebody buying your house, that purchaser is going to say, "Well, look, I want X off because the damp-proof course needs to be re-injected." I'm using that as an analogy from my own first house that I bought. A damp-proof course needed to be sorted out.
Fair enough.
And I negotiated, just to show what a good lawyer negotiator I am, I negotiated a discount from the house because I had to go and get damp-proof course injected in.
So a buyer's not going to want to pay for something that happened on seller's watch. And so, it would be common to have some sort of price reduction or contractual cover that would cover any eventualities as a result of that. So what we're trying to do is reduce those opportunities, reduce those issues.
And if there isn't an obvious buyer, people will use what typically like a corporate finance broker, somebody to put the business out and market the business.
Yeah, depending on sort of what industry or sector you're in, there are different sort of advisors available to you. And we work with loads of different advisors in different sectors, whether it's healthcare or manufacturing or energy or education or whatever. And it's just getting the right person in touch with you And so if someone came to me and said, I'm selling this.
A pharmacy, you would know who you would refer the pharmacist
right,
to.
you need to speak to these people, and they would then start the sales process and the running the figures and getting it prepared, really.
If you can agree a price and it is a sale of shares, arm's length to a buyer, that is, provided you can find that buyer, that's doable within if you've got the right lawyer and right team engaged, that's doable within the timescale.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I would generously give, a 2 to 3 month timescale would be a comfortable timescale for a set of focus parties. And if you wanted to do it quicker, it's definitely achievable.
Broadly, though, once I've got my buyer of my shares in place, in terms of the process that's involved, I've heard of something that's called due diligence. DD. You guys call it DD.
We do.
Not D&D. Did you ever play Dungeons and Dragons?
I was cool, yeah.
No, you. Well, fair enough. I did play a little bit of it. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was the one that I played. But what is due diligence? Talk me through that.
So due diligence is, I suppose, it overlaps with sort of that preparation for sale. So a buyer is going to want to know what they're buying, in the same way that you want to know what you're buying in terms of a house. You'll go and walk around, knock on the walls, make sure the windows are watertight. Yeah. Similar with a business, you're going to make sure that the employees are being properly paid. There aren't any customer complaints. Similarly, the property is up to scratch. There aren't any issues with the landlord. What's the bad debt situation? And we go through a process where we ask a lot of questions into that, and we drill down into.
Or at least your buyer will be asking you a lot of questions, and we'll be helping you answer those questions.
And so whichever side we're on, we're either looking into it or we're responding to those and trying to, not present it in a way that it is, not going to sort of prejudice your position from a negotiation or a price point of view.
And up to a point too, you will then. You will get back. You produce some sort of a report will be produced, presumably by the buyers.
Yeah, so you'd expect a report to come out of the results of that. That will result in maybe further questions, maybe some contractual protections, and that sort of, that's why we were trying to get a house in order to reduce those issues. And then off the back of that, we go into the sort of the contractual negotiations. A lot of that will be sort of generic for most transactions, but then sort of transaction specific based on due diligence or what's been agreed. And
this ends up typically in, again, I'm going to use an acronym now, but this ends up in an SPA. What does that stand for? So it's one of those.
A share purchase agreement, right, is what we like to call it, an SPA. So that's what we'll get
negotiated.
Yeah, really, from start. So once we've got the due diligence underway, and then the buyer will produce this contract, and then it's on the parties to turn that, negotiate it, and that's where having your advisors who are familiar with the process, with the industry, the sectors you're working in, who understand the issues, and cut through the crap, as it were, to what does matter to the client.
A buyer or a seller of something that's in that industry. And in terms of that will also lead to a set of warranties that the seller will typically, they'll be asked to provide a set of warranties. What's the purpose of that?
Yeah, so the warranties are statements that a seller's going to provide. So you're going to say, yes, there are no product issues, or yes, that everything's we are compliant with all laws, etc. And then that gives the buyer an angle. If those statements turn out not to be true, then they can look at
bringing a claim after the sale
contract. Yeah, subject to certain conditions. So as part of the sale process, one of our jobs is to put in protections, limitations, we call them, but they're essentially hoops or hurdles for the buyer to go over before a claim can actually be made. So it's not just a matter of a buyer making a claim for every 10 or 15 or £100. We would have financial limits. We would have time limits that cover these claims. So, one of our jobs as a seller or acting for a seller is to protect that purchase price as much as possible. And then alongside those warranties is we have what we would call the disclosure process, which is not dissimilar to due diligence. So the disclosure would be treated as a shield. So where we know those warranties or those statements are not going to be true, what we can actually do is disclose the true issue. It provides protection for breach of contract in that respect.
Yeah, so if you've got a warranty that you haven't got any employee claims, that would be a typical warranty that would be given, but you had got a claim, you would then disclose against that warranty and in effect write a letter that says, I give the warranty number 27C, apart from the claim that my receptionist is making against me for unfair dismissal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you put some parameters in as to what you think that might cost if you lose or if you win or whatever.
So, yeah, it sort of has twofold effect. One is preventing a claim for breach of contract, but it also puts the buyer on notice of that particular issue. And then they will seek further contractual protection as they see fit. And then that's part of the negotiation process.
The quite labour intensive, these share purchases, sort of quite a few late nights as you're getting right down to the end date, the completion date.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I find clients are always surprised as to how much work actually is required when we go through this process. And at the outset, I will say to a client, you've got to appreciate you're trying to do your day job as well as sell the business.
Yeah.
And they think, it's fine, no problem. But it's actually a huge job to manage the due diligence, the negotiations, because as we're acting for the client, we can only do things with the client's input, with the client's instructions, and we require a lot of time. And I think it can be underestimated as to how much of a commitment and how time-consuming that process can be, particularly as you run up to that completion. We often find, you get to a point where I call it deal fatigue, where clients are just worn out by the whole process and just want it done. And sometimes you can lose focus as to what,
why am I really doing this?
Yes.
Sort of thing.
And sometimes that, they'll concede just on the basis they want to get it done rather than actually should they be conceding a particular point. And that's, partly where we step in and say, well, hang on, look, this is what we should be doing. And so, yeah, that's part of the process, part of what we manage and how we get clients to the end.
I mean, they in terms of the options, I mean, share sale is one of the options that's around. Another one that I think has changed since I went into practice and I was a trainee in a corporate team at one point, the option of purchase of own shares.
Yeah, so we're sort of moving away from sort of third-party disposal maybe now and into sort of the more sort of what I call internal sort of matters where we're now dealing with our own and within ourselves. So purchase of own shares is essentially where the company buys its shares back from
the owner,
the shareholder, and it could be done on it could be a handful of shares, it could be all of the shares. It's one way that a shareholder can extract value from
and presumably lock in the lower CGT rates.
Yeah.
Subject to tax advice, I get it, and everything else that I know you guys are going to say.
It's definitely possible, and getting sort of a heads up from HMRC on these types of things where we're looking at.
Yeah, but when, and I think I mentioned this to you the other day, and you were sort of a little bit like, okay, granddad, but when I was sort of 20 odd years ago plus, there was a process when there was a company purchase of own shares called a whitewash procedure, and that doesn't exist anymore, is my understanding. But it has sort of been. There's an equivalent, right?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it was sort of before my time in terms of the corporate world, but it was sort of getting
pre-approval, really.
Yeah, and funding your own sort of funding yourself in a way that used to be prohibited in certain ways, but now there's a lot more flexibility and
the HMRC is more open to it, albeit they do still get involved, don't they? Isn't it wise for people to get a HMRC clearance prior to any deal?
It is. You don't have to get HMRC clearance, but it's always sensible to do that because what you want to do is you want to get that comfort that HMRC are going to treat whether it's a share buyback or whether it's a bigger restructuring in a certain way. Now, as long as you're doing a transaction for bona fide reasons, for genuine commercial reasons, and you are within the legislation, you can write to HMRC and get what we call clearance, and they say we're doing this, this, and this, and you set out the process, and they will sort of rubber stamp it, really.
And what are you almost saying? We think that the X tax rate will apply, in effect.
Well, we were saying we think we think it falls within this section of, the whatever.
The relevant act.
And therefore this will apply and we're not going to get stung. Do you agree? And what that does is then it gives the client comfort that, what they're doing is they're not spending a lot of money doing this restructuring to find out they're going to get hit with the tax anyway.
Yeah.
So spending a little bit up front just to get that comfort is...
And I imagine, is this something where lawyers and accountants are working in Sympactico? We really are hand in hand on
pretty much. So the clearance is almost always going to be done by your tax advisor or your accountant. And then what we would tend to find is, your accountant and quite often, I'll know my client's accountants quite well. We work with them on a regular basis, and I say, right, Jamie, this is what we've got from HMRC. This is the approval. We need you to do the legals to get this done. Yeah, no problem. And then we produce all the documents to effect that in it. And as long as it's in accordance with the clearance from HMRC, it's all good.
So, and again, if people are looking to do this within the timescale before April to lock in some of these rates, I mean, some of the rates have changed already, and they won't be able to do that. But certainly in relation to the BADR relief that we were talking about earlier, that 10% rate, is that doable in this timescale now?
Yeah, I think the HMRC turnaround for clearance applications is relatively short. I want to say it's about 30 days, and I believe they're pretty responsive at the minute in terms of getting that through. But yeah, so, as with any of this sort of preparation, I think, starting the conversation, the thought process as soon as possible and having the conversation with your accountancy, your lawyers sooner rather than later, compared to when I had a call a week before the budget last week saying I need to sell my company before the budget.
Did they do it? No.
You're always trying not to sort of laugh in their face a little bit because you're thinking... You just don't understand what's involved.
But realistically, if somebody's having that conversation now, right up until we get to sort of January, end of January, really, I think this should be achievable, right?
Absolutely, plenty of time to get everything done. It's when you start to get into February time and you haven't got anything in place, then you're going to start to struggle, I think, because then there's going to be a pinch point of everybody else rushing to accountants, lawyers, HMRC.
I certainly in the last month or so there was a number of lawyers were not taking on new instructions because they were just
absolutely
so overwhelmed with the work that they were doing to try and beat the budget. And now we've got another April and then the following April a sort of timescale to try and get some of these, trying to get that relief in place.
Definitely.
We can. I think there's certainly going to be a rush to the finish line there as well.
I certainly hope so.
One other sort of, if it is a separate category, but it falls into the reorganisational side of it, is we have seen actually an increase in solvent liquidations as a method of. We hope you are all enjoying this podcast. To keep these going, it really helps us a lot if you could hit the subscribe button or the thumbs up button below this video. It means that we get more engagement with the podcast and it helps us out a lot. So if you could do that, I would appreciate it.
It's another way of extracting value out of a business. So that's going to less involve sort of lawyers, and it might fall after, say, a business sale as opposed to a company sale, where you appoint an insolvency practitioner to manage the affairs and wind them down on your behalf, and they'll distribute the value in a certain way that's effective.
It's called an MVL is the typical route, a members voluntary liquidation, and that is in effect a liquidator being appointed to gather in the assets and sale like you would do on an insolvent liquidation, albeit the company is solvent and the only monies are being paid back out to the shareholders.
Absolutely, and I think it's easy to think when you say liquidators to think negatively. It's not a negative connotation in that sense. It's actually just another way of sort of winding a business down legitimately.
And we can, as a law firm, as you say, we wouldn't actually literally carry out a solvent liquidation ourselves, but we've got good connections to various insolvency practitioners who we like and trust across the Midlands who can handle that, albeit in the first instance it will likely be the client's own accountant who's considering what the best option is and what they want to do. I imagine you're probably only going to do an MVL if that is, the end of the business, as opposed to, succession planning.
So, client I dealt with probably 18 months ago, it was a business sale. So the company took the proceeds of the sale, and then they've appointed liquidators to distribute the proceeds over a period.
Back out to the shareholders.
To the shareholders, yeah.
One of the other changes yesterday was around business property relief and agricultural property relief. Both of those reliefs, in effect, meant that a business owner and an owner of a farm, if they died with their boots on and the property was to be passed to typically a family member on their death, that they would not pay any inheritance tax whatsoever.
Yeah, so typically they would expect 100% relief on that.
Now, that's changed, and actually now, a bit like BADR, they're only getting that relief on the first £1 million, and then any value over and above £1 million, they'll be paying tax on that, 50% of the tax at least, which is a substantial change to the regime.
I think it's quite significant, because when you're looking at agricultural land and businesses alike, £1 million doesn't necessarily go that far. And then all of a sudden, if you've got to pay 50% of the charge over £1 million, it's creating what's referred to sometimes as a dry tax charge. So you haven't got liquid assets to use to pay that off.
So you have to sell a field or sell something to be able to
absolutely
tax.
So the question is, well, how do you pay for that if you are in that situation, and you either got to sell the assets of which you've just inherited? I've heard talk of maybe new products coming to the insurance market where you could insure against those types of things, or you beat the tax charge by lifetime gift awards in advance.
I was going to come on to that, but see, the one thing as somebody who is a litigator, one thing I do observe in businesses where it's a family business or farms where it's a family farm, because it made sense to die with your boots on, to die and then pass that because you're going to pay no inheritance tax. You'd got a lot of crazy situations where these types of businesses were owned by people in their mid and late 80s with sons or daughters in their 60s who were running these organisations with no shares or no equitable ownership of those business assets. Up to a point now, it was a crazy situation in some respects. The succession, it didn't make sense to pass your shares on. It didn't make sense to pass the farm on because, well, first of all, you're going to potentially lose your inheritance tax relief. And now that these changes have been introduced, up to a point, succession planning and getting some tax advice again on succession planning is far more important, because the incentive to die with your boots on has gone, right?
Yeah, it's definitely been significantly reduced, and there are definitely other options available to people. But again, it comes to that planning ahead.
Yeah.
And in some sense, we're talking 7 years now, where if you want to be
because if you were to gift, this is a corporate lawyer and a dispute resolution lawyer discussing inheritance tax,
which I'm aware of,
and we will get on the podcast one of our wills and probate lawyers in the near future. But if you gift an asset such as that and you live 7 years, you will typically have 100. That gift will be tax free. It only will be taxed if you die within that 7 year period after the gift.
I believe that's correct, and I think there's a sliding scale on that.
There's a sliding scale depending on how quickly you die after the gift has been made. That said, if that sort of it triggers a load of different legal issues. I do know that in different sectors of we can help with. Sometimes one of the reasons why an older parent keeps hold of the assets is they're concerned about they gift it to their daughter who may have a rocky marriage, maybe getting divorced. Do we need to be looking at prenups and post-nups agreements? I mean, I think that kicks in. Also, in terms of, you might have certain views on how the company should be run. Do we need to be seeing shareholders agreements that, father gives the shares and then finds out that, his nephews are all being sacked or whatever else, and may want to sort of be able to impose a certain impact on how the company's going to be run in the future, and that can be covered in legal documentation.
Yeah, when you're handing over control to the next generation, maybe on a shareholder level, we can put in place shareholders agreements where if things don't go quite right, mom and dad or whoever it is can step back in and sort of say, well, this isn't going well, clearly.
Might not get the inheritance tax relief there, of course, if they do that, but yeah. But you can put certain rules in place.
We can cover off eventualities, and at that point you're looking at what's the best worst case scenario, I guess, in that case when things aren't going to plan. But it's shareholders agreements, prenups, and all those types of things can be put in place as a comfort blanket, I guess.
And I guess probably what we're going to see a lot more of, and again, people will be diving into the small print of the budget, but the use of the discretionary trust as a vehicle for holding shares.
Yeah, it's something that we see. We've done a few on the run up to the budget. Is putting a couple in place, and we're perfectly equipped to be able to do that. And we work with the accountants, and we put in place the trust, and then we transfer the assets into the trust. Whether that's shares, property, both. It's quite a common way to sort of plan for the future.
And then I guess then the other piece is in relation to the budget that likely to have legal impacts. National insurance and the national minimum wage are going up. I think that there's clearly all of the detail hasn't quite come out yet. It's clearly a trap for those micro businesses that after whilst they're being protected, I think it's similar to the VAT cliff edge. You employ one more person, and then all of a sudden you're looking at paying an extra 10 grand a year of tax, which business owners have got to be really wary of.
I think so, and a lot of our clients are small business owners, aren't they? And we deal with them, and they have already a number of pressures from a number of places. Now all of a sudden there's another hit where businesses have been expected to take quite a chunk of this £40 billion sort of tax, raising in terms of it. So I think that's just another pressure that's going to.
Robots and AI, perhaps that's what's. I mean, I suspect that with the increased cost of employment, those devices for running, for increasing productivity are going to be used more as an alternative. A robot doesn't have unfair dismissal rights from day one. A robot doesn't qualify for the national minimum wage yet.
No, and you couple that with the R&D relief as well. There could be a double bubble there, but businesses are going to be looking for every opportunity to look at alternatives in terms of tax saving.
And I think with the use of AI, it's something that we have to be careful and mindful of. As lawyers, there is a big data protection angle that can kick in there, and making sure that you've got your ducks in a row in terms of complying with GDPR, so that you're not exposed. By when you're using these, putting a load of data into the internet, certain of the products don't feed specific data or private data back into the cloud, whereas certain of the applications do. And I think that getting some advice from the likes of ourselves in relation to GDPR and data protection compliance is really important. If that's one of the ways that you're going to look at, reducing exposure following the budget, and because you're going to be less reliant on employees as a method of carrying out some of this work.
I think that's right. AI in particular is a hugely fast-moving sort of area, isn't it? And just understanding, it's easy to jump onto something without understanding what it is you're signing up to. So making sure that you are compliant with your obligations so far as your employees or your customers or your patients or whoever it is may be.
And I think that you're going to see that in those due diligence questionnaires, I assume, coming up. There's going to be, if they're already starting to be questions about that.
GDPR is pretty standard anyway, in terms of questionnaires, because of the sensitive nature of some of the businesses we work in, for example, that whether that's healthcare, pharmacies, and the like. So that it's there as a standard, but it can be quite sort of quite a huge area that can be explored from a duty.
Yeah, well, it's an area of risk, right? So and I think that going forward, the legal aspects of that are something that people do need to take advice on. There could be significant fines imposed by the data commissioner in relation to the information commissioner, in relation to sort of data breaches. I think that we will see more use of that technology going forward as a result of the fact it just costs so much more to employ people. We'll also probably see some offshoring occurring as well, and again that creates all of the getting your work done in different jurisdictions, which again creates GDPR issues, compliance issues, data protection issues that if you're a sensible business owner, you will take some advice on before you implement those steps.
It's an area that, in my experience, is underestimated from a client point of view, particularly in due diligence. Have you got policies for data protection? Have you got agreements in place? And quite often they just haven't fully considered it.
No. And then I guess the final area is in relation to stamp duty, which relates to property. I appreciate I'm not speaking to a property lawyer. Most of those changes that have been immediately implemented. So in some respects, there's probably not that much mitigation that could be done.
No, I think was it an additional 3% stamp duty on second homes, if I recall. So, probably not going to affect a lot of us, but for some, it could be quite a hit.
We alluded to this on our last podcast around landlords, perhaps vacating the market because it's going to be alongside the abolition of Section 21. It's getting harder and harder. It's getting harder, particularly if it's getting harder to be a landlord in the private sector. And if now every time you're buying another house, your stamp duty is effectively doubled, then that's going to be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it seems from a landlord point of view, it's just more regulation, more cost to be in the sector. So tenants are being increasingly protected.
And of course, if anyone is looking to sell their portfolios, we can help them through that process. Our property team can help them through that process, and we'll get one of the property lawyers on this podcast in the next few weeks so they can talk through those processes. Okay, so to finish where we've started, it looks that the budget has increased the cost of disposing of a business.
Yes.
It will increase in due course.
It has and it will, yeah.
It has already and it will. We're there to help, probably as part of a team.
Yep.
However, if you are looking to get moving in terms of selling your business or disposing of your business assets, what are we saying to clients?
Have a conversation sooner rather than later, whether it's with us or your accountant. And if you haven't got a sort of an accountant who's experienced in transactions, we know
lots of them.
Lots. And just getting that sort of conversation started, the sooner we do it, the sooner the client does it, the more options they'll have available to them, and therefore the more money they're likely to save.